Okay, so let me just share the unit specification with you first before we start, and we'll take it from there. Just give me 1 second. Okay, so let me just share the unit specification with you first before. Okay, that's the assignment brief. Here we go. So that's the unit specification. So we are going to continue on our journey today with regards to, looking at covering learning outcome 4 today. And in learning outcome 4, as you can see, there are a couple of assessment criteria. Just very briefly, in terms of what we did yesterday and in the previous weeks, was to look at the role of technology in education. And as you can see, this particular unit has 4 learning outcomes, and we have discussed the pedagogy related to how the adaptive pedagogy in education can be used when we are looking at delivering using education, technology in education. So primarily looking at, the use of technology, whether it's hardware, any sort of equipment, software, or any sort of enhancements using technology, which allows us to become a bit more efficient and obviously deliver teaching and learning experiences which create inclusive learning and inclusive teaching within a classroom or any sort of a classroom-based setting. So in our case, obviously, we are using Zoom as a technology to be able to deliver these sessions online. The second learning outcome was mostly focused on the use of technology. So we went into details of how technology platforms, various platforms which are available today, can be used in facilitating the delivery of teaching and learning in a classroom or a classroom-based setting. And this allowed us to look into various details like the different platforms, which we include things like Blackboard, learner management systems, surveys. In schools, we have ProMonitor. In universities, we have Blackboards. And the use of equipment, which could be audiovisual equipments like projectors, interactive touchscreens, and obviously softwares or applications which can be used on the internet. And they facilitate learning from a point of view of providing equal opportunities. The focus was how technology can be leveraged and how can it become a key medium wherein it allows us to provide equal opportunities to all learners within classrooms. Specifically, when we look at disabilities or learners with challenging disabilities, we do need use of technology in classrooms to be able to provide them the opportunity to achieve the learning outcomes or the aims and objectives set, which allow them also to achieve those as look at as we do see other learners achieving in the class. In the third learning outcome, we went into the use of technology and how do we use it to manage data. So here, the focus was predominantly on looking at compliance, regulation, and also ensuring that how does the user level access be created within organizations, because as technology is used more and more in schools, whether it's primary or secondary education, further education, and higher education, you see a lot of the technology is also producing reports, data, which needs to be stored, monitored, retrieved, and reviewed. And in such cases, how do we look at the use of technology in facilitating this particular monitoring, review, access to data, wherein we also look into regulations like GDPR, data protection, and also ensure that if data is stored, a personal data for learners is stored, whether it could be grades, it could be assignment marks, it could be pre-admission data related to identity, their background, their religion, their preferences, things like that, how it is given access, and the availability of the compliance and regulation in terms of policies and procedures within educational institution allow the data protection officer or DPO essentially to then provide this access on a need to know basis or on a basis wherein the user level access rights are set. And that is what we discussed in terms of how can technology be used to essentially look at maintaining and managing data. So things like you look at encryption, we look at, for example, 2FA, which is two-factor authentication, and obviously user level access, which can all be done using the use of technology. And that was primarily the learning outcome 3. In learning outcome 4, today we are going to be looking at one of the things that you would see in the various learning outcomes that we've covered, it talks about understanding. So here the idea is that you need to be able to know and develop knowledge about the subject area. But when we look at learning outcome 4, it talks about be able to. So here we have to put things into practice of what we have learned in this particular unit, and then essentially look at going into detailing of the assessment criteria which are given related to this learning outcome. So learning outcome 4 essentially talks about be able to plan and carry out research using technology. Now, this is, I feel personally, as a lecturer, this is a bit of a misnomer here, because when we do look at research, research is a separate topic, but what we have to do is contextualize this topic in the context of technology in education, which is the unit, and look at how, as teachers, instructors, educators, lecturers, tutors, teaching assistant, whatever name we use and title we use, how do we use technology to do research on a particular area that we are going to teach and obviously deliver in the class. And there are 6 assessment criteria. So what I would want to do in this particular learning outcome today is basically share with you how we would go about putting together a small research, how would we go about choosing a small research area which is going to address all the assessment criteria of this learning outcome. So there is a bit of a background knowledge required in terms of research and research methods, which could be related to things like primary research, secondary research, why do we do research, aims and objectives, rationale of research. Sometimes you look at research methodology, how do you collect data, how do you look at the data sources, how do you collate those findings from the data that you've collected, and then conclude them in terms of some sort of conclusions. And then how do you put together a timeline around your research, which is going to be quite important. Now, in this, what we are also going to do is throw into the mix, when we look at the use of technology, how does technology come to our aid? For example, things like when you look at the word plagiarism, so scanning of the assessments in terms of similarity and plagiarism can be done with the use of technology. Assignments set, deadlines can be set. When is the assignment released? Or when is the test going to happen? When is the assessment going to happen? We set a deadline for it, when they are supposed to be completed. So those are the bits that we will look at objectively addressing in terms of this particular learning outcome. And obviously, at some stage, when the evidence is available from learners, we look at reviewing feedback, assessments, formative oblique summative, and then also look at giving developmental feedback, which would allow learners to be able to improve their skills and knowledge related to this particular area. So there are going to be 6 learning outcomes, that 6 assessment criteria in this particular learning outcome. And in order to discuss this, what I'm going to do is primarily share with you a PowerPoint presentation, and that PowerPoint presentation would give us some areas of discussing these assessment criteria after we look at an overarching, let's say some bit of knowledge and information that we look at in terms of the overarching area of the learning outcome and the field, and then go into some of the assessment criteria. Is that okay? Any questions on this, Ahmed? Okay, that's great. So for this particular learning outcome, what I've also done is I have created a few templates, which hopefully I will share with you as we go along. And they would be useful at the time when you start doing your assignment for this particular unit. And those can be used to contextualize them. And obviously you can own these templates and then use them as annexures and obviously attach it for the purposes of evidence. Now, when we look at this particular learning outcome, the learning outcome says be able to plan and carry out research using technology. Now, research is an independent subject area, and obviously technology can come to the aid of helping us do research. Most of the research today that we look at, I would not say most, but I would say if we have to look at a preference, I think the preference for research tends to be desk-based because of the availability of internet and some bits of the data that we want to look at researching being available electronically. So in most cases, when we look at technology in today's context of technology, what we are seeing is that in research areas specifically, it is playing a bit of a pivotal role because it allows us to gather information easily. There are lots of repositories from which we can actually gather this information, and to a certain extent, it helps us in enhancing the field of our research or the area of our research because it makes information easily available, and we can also use the information that we want to disseminate to our participants who are going to participate in the research easily through the medium of social media or electronic, bulletin boards. Now, the learning outcome talks about carry out research. So what I've done is I've put together a few slides which basically rejig or give you a bit of a macro overview of how do you actually plan research. And what I've done is in that basically stitched in the elements of technology. Where do we see the use of technology in the traditional ways of how research was carried out? So if I go back and if I ask you to put on your thinking hats and for a moment go back into time, maybe 10 years back, 20 years back, and ask you to say, how would you do research in a particular area? So if we were looking at COVID-19 as a pandemic, just as an example, if this was something which was an area of research that you wanted to carry out, how would you carry this out without the use of technology? In the olden days, we would have created a team, team would have been given responsibilities. And at some stage, once the proposal was approved, budgeting was done, timeline was set, and how and what data had to be collected was set. A number of volunteers used to go out in the market and obviously get surveys or questionnaires filled, because most of the data being collected in such cases would have been primary. And the idea was to primarily go across and get these surveys, questionnaires filled, and get hold of information firsthand. But nowadays, if I have to look at doing this research, some part of it can be automated using the use of technology, because we use secondary data. And in such cases, we can send out these questionnaires using technology to participants who have opted into, share their insights for this research. And in some cases, we might be able to look at published reports and data which is already available to look at responses of certain questionnaires or surveys which have been served earlier if they were related to a particular pandemic. So we could see a traditional approach in terms of how research would have been carried out and how technology comes to the aid, wherein we're able to send out questionnaires through using social media, Facebook, LinkedIn, Google Docs or forms. And there are other types of softwares available which allow us to send this across to our users, specifically when research is being carried out. In the olden days, when data was collected, questionnaires were manually compiled. If we were using, for example, a Likert scale, which was very unlikely to likely to say neutral, and then say very likely and very, or something like a positive to a negative or a negative to a positive scale, you have to manually go through the questionnaires. But nowadays, technology can be used primarily to crunch this data using softwares like SPSS, Qualmetrics, and these allow you to analyze large amounts of data which has been collected from primary participants or from research questionnaires. And that is where technology comes to your aid. You can create beautiful graphs, charts, and things like that in terms of how data points can be presented. And that is where the use of technology comes in. One such use of technology that I would say is we are using in terms of teaching and delivery is something, although not directly related to research, we are using Zoom, a video conferencing software, the use of internet, PC, a web camera, audio-visual devices to be able to transmit this session to people who are essentially either on YouTube watching it, or in some cases in the comforts of your own room, actually enjoying and joining this particular session. So the couple of slides that I've created here talk about research design methodology and how you would use technology. So today's survey and data collection can be done using Google Forms, SurveyMonkey, Qualmetrics, a lot of softwares. You have collaboration tools like Microsoft SharePoint, Google Workspace, Slack, Microsoft Teams, which can be used to get a lot of, let's say, participants who are going to be participating in a research online onto a single platform wherein discussions can happen, real-time communications can happen. And obviously, all this is possible using the use of technology. Now, when it comes to data analysis, I mentioned softwares like SPSS and even the use of AI today, which allow, and NumPy and SkyPy, which allow you to basically look at compiling large amounts of quantitative data that has been collected from participants, and it allows you to then analyze that data, get to reports, and obviously create reports which will allow you to make or come to some sort of conclusions or decision making. And this has become really, easy and I would say less time consuming because of the use of technology. Now, Once the data is available, if it's electronically stored, you're also able to see the advantage of that data being available to several other researchers and colleagues or community, because of the fact that data now that you have compiled and researched on can be stored electronically on the cloud and easily retrieved depending on the access rights. And that allows them to build on their understanding by looking at research, not starting from the very scratch, but they can look at where the last research report was published, what were the outcomes, and they can start to build onto the research outcomes of that to take it further. And that makes it easier, because of the use of technology. When we look at data privacy and security, obviously, if you recall, when we do research, we have to give out what is called a participant information form, PIF, and we also give out what is called a participant consent form. And these two forms essentially allow participants who are going to be contributing to the research to say and provide information. And once this information is used at some stage, we need to anonymize the information so that it does not divulge any personal or private details of the participant who have come forward and shared their findings or their data with the researcher. So in such cases, when we look at the use of technology, we have to implement what is called data privacy and security guidelines to ensure that the data is kept secure. These questionnaires or in the form in which the data has been collected is available only to the researcher in some sort of a format which does not, does not divulge, let me put it this way, their personal details or certain personal aspects of the participants who have consented to participate in the research. Now, one of the things that you recall when medical research is done, say, for example, if they are trialing out a new blood pressure, monitoring tablet or a new cancer drug, what tends to happen is the medical records and medical data of the participants is not shared with companies outside in the private sector, because they would then charge premiums accordingly if you were to take out a private medical insurance or things like that. So in such cases, this makes it mandatory for the data to be made private, some part of the data to be made private, so that personal details and privacy of the participants are preserved and maintained when the research is carried out. So technology again comes to the aid here, wherein this can be done, I would not say easily, but it can be done in a much more collaborated, precise manner, so that data cannot go or cannot be, the data which is not to be shared does not go out in the hands of companies or private providers for the purposes of use for other reasons, which could be used for marketing reasons, commercial reasons, and things like that. And then when we look at the final part of your project in terms of research is conclusions and presentation of findings. These can be done in various formats. Again, sometimes these findings are presented in the form of reports, in the form of interviews, in the form of conferences, or in the form of viva and voce, which is typically done towards the end to take questions and understand and give findings about the research. But with the use of technology, it can now be presented in the meaningful format through presentations, creation of charts, graphs, various other mind maps and other facilities which allow researchers to present data to different stakeholders, and these kind of reports which can be created with the use of technology allow, data to be segregated, data to be separated and provided according to the stakeholder requirements. Now, one of the previous things that we look at in terms of traditional reports were that they were bound, printed out, the reports were bound, and obviously copies of those reports were made available to various stakeholders. But nowadays, electronic copies of these reports can be published in journals and obviously can be made easily available through the use of email and publishing software. So as you can see, if you look at traditional methods of how research was done and how technology has come to the rescue, you would see that there is some difference in between the two in terms of how technology is essentially enabling research and research reports to be published, or conclusions on these reports and decision making to be done in a much more scientific and, I would say, practical manner, whereas the dissemination of information can also be done, in a much more easier way. Now, one of the last things in terms of a traditional report that we do is also looking at review and feedback. So you also look at putting areas down in terms of ethical considerations, future areas of research, and obviously look at taking some feedback from participants and various stakeholders which have been involved in doing that research. Again, this is something which can be done primarily with the use of software now and technology. And generally, what tends to happen is once the research is concluded, a lot of researchers would essentially, put out reviews and survey forms, which could be, sent across to participants, various stakeholders, and they are then required to complete these forms to be able to allow essentially, I would say, feedback to be collected at the, researchers end. Now, when we look at publishing of this research, one of the things that you would also see is that peer submissions and peer reviews of these research journals can also be done predominantly, using the use of technology. So today, if you publish an article in a particular journal and you want to send it for review, you no longer need to do a print version of it, send it in the post. You might be able to use technological platforms or online collaboration platforms like Google Docs, SharePoint, Microsoft Teams, Dropbox Paper, and then send this across to a group of your peers, and they would be able to review it for you, and they would be able, all the commenting annotation that is done can be captured electronically, and it makes it easier for record purposes also to store that information. And this is where the use of technology essentially comes in for the purposes of looking at how you differentiate traditional approaches or traditional means through which we used to carry out research, and how we can use technology to a certain extent in terms of enabling that activity to happen, but also enabling it to happen with the context of making it accessible, making it easier in some cases, also making it faster in terms of availability and dissemination of information to be, let's say, put across in a much more easier, faster, and efficient way with the use of technology. So this table that I've put up here actually summarizes, what you would do in terms of carrying out research, which are the basic steps, and then the role of technology and some example of softwares in particular, which are used in different contexts, and how they can benefit researchers or people like teachers, instructors, lecturers, if we are planning to carry out research, how they can effectively help you in, carrying out a better research project, or essentially, depends on whether it's speed, whether it's efficiency, whether it's looking at involvement from a number of different participants, different stakeholders. All such things can be done with the use of technology, because you can set access rights to data availability and contribution in terms of what individual users can make. And that is what I've summarized on the table. Is that okay? Any questions on this, Amir, so far?
No, sir.
Okay. Now, thank you. Now, what we want to be able to look at is some of the assessment criteria which are associated with this learning outcome. Now, what I would want you to do is essentially look at putting on your thinking hat that you are a teacher. And if you were asked to do or carry out a research in a particular chosen topic, how would you go about carrying out this research with the use of technology? So the first task here talks about producing a plan of research on a chosen topic. So here, what I put across in the slide is to say, if you think that if you put yourself in the shoes of a teacher and think of a research topic that you're going to work on. For example, you're going to start planning a delivery of a unit, a new unit that you have not delivered before, or you're looking at, assuming if you were a supply teacher and you've been called in by the agency to cover somebody's absence, and you've been given a lesson work and a scheme of work or a lesson plan to teach and deliver to this particular class for a number of days. Now, in such cases, what you would need to do is you would need to understand the area of the delivery. What is the topic? Say, for example, if it was biology that you were looking at as a teacher delivering, or if you were looking at delivering, say, covering in for a colleague who's on leave, and you were looking at teaching maths, then in such cases, what you would look at is the topic list that you want to teach for the next few days, how that topic list would be related to the curriculum in the school, or where your colleague was teaching, And then you will look at some of the key parameters which have been defined in the course handbook, or for example, things like key descriptors, learning outcomes, aims and objectives. And then that is what you would use to primarily define your area of research. Because if it's something new that you haven't done before, then you would need to do a bit of preparation to say, this is how would I would approach the topic. This is how I would look at the topic list. And I would basically look at delivering this in the class. You might plan some activities. You might look at, making a list of resources that you would need. These resources could be, resources that you would need in terms of, say, videos, handouts, books, or printouts that you would create to be shared across with students or learners. And that would be the area of research that you would carry out primarily to say that, okay, if I were to look at delivering this particular topic or a list of topics as per the list when I'm covering for someone, this is the approach that I would take. This is how I would go about, teaching that particular topic area to the children in the class or learners in the class. And that is what you need to look at in terms of producing a plan. Now, there are various plans and obviously a lot of different templates which are available. But what I've done to make it easier is to basically share a bit of a template with you. And that template is basically a research proposal template. So if we were to carry out this particular task, then what I would want to look at would be to say that this is a template that I would essentially end up using. And that would be something which will help me define what is the research topic and what is it that I'm going to do when I look at either a coverage or, say, for example, doing a bit of research as a topic which has been given in the school. So let me share this particular template with you. So this would also be available upon Moodle after the session. So this is a particular template that I've looked at. Now, let's look at a practical area, if I may put it this way. Assuming if I work as a teacher in a school, one of the things which my managers has asked me to do is that they've asked me to analyze the outcomes of, say, for example, analyze the performance data of last year students who have done and sat GCSEs. So if this was a project which was asked to be done by a manager or by your principal head teacher in the school, and they would have said that, okay, you're responsible as the course leader to look at how the overall results of GCSE physics or biology or any one particular subject areas has come out. What were the teacher predicted grades? What grades have actually the students actually scored in the exams? And where do we think our performance of the school has been for this cohort vis-a-vis the previous year? Now, this could be one area of research that you could look at. And in doing so, what you would do is essentially look at defining some of this planning part of this in the research using this research template. So you might start with your name, title, and topic of your research. And that could be, say, for example, analyzing, or I would say analyzing the results, GCSE results. If I put it this way, GCSE results of physics vis-a-vis last year. So I would be looking at basically a comparison of 2024 results vis-a-vis 2023. And that is a report which your manager has asked you to look at. So you're going to be looking at details in terms of how many students are there in the classes. For example, if it's a secondary school, they have 3 or 4 sections of year 10 which have taken the exam. So each section has 30 students. There were 90 students who sat the exam from the school. There were 3 form tutors which were looking after the cohort. And then you look at the physics teachers. And that is where you'll start to look at area of research to look at why. And then you benchmark these results against how the national average has been with regards to the results in physics this year, or triple science vis-a-vis that. So depending on whatever topic you choose, you have to look at doing a bit of research, because at the end of the day, what you need to be coming out with is some sort of a conclusion of how the unit was or the subject area was taught, what were the best practices, what were the areas in which we were weak, and obviously why the results or how the results have come out to be good or bad as against other schools in the Manchester area. Now, you might define what is your role in the organization. You might state some objectives, why you want to look at, for example, if the school is looking at taking up a different curriculum next year, some of the objectives could be that they are looking at bringing across meaningful improvements. You could define that in the research template. The purpose of research is to look at, if it was a new school, one of the things that I'll mention is that if you assume that you are a new school and this was, as a new school, you're in the first 5 years of your establishment, and what you're looking at doing is how do we improve our grades so that when we have offset inspections, we could also be scoring, excellent or exceedingly well in those inspections. So the idea here is to look at a bit of the plan that you're going to look at, the overview of that plan that you're going to put together in the research proposal template. What is the specific area of research? Some of the points that I've mentioned might be defunct, might not be required, but here the idea is to broadly cover some parts of it, which is to say, what is the research that you're going to do? What are the aims and objectives of the research? Why this research is being carried out? And then what are the issues that research findings will address? That is the most important point that you need to cover. And then what are the various sources from which data is going to be collected? Why is it that you're looking at doing this research? That would be something that you would look at covering and referring to the literature review. And then in research methodology, you're going to look at where you're going to collect the data from, whether it's going to be a qualitative research, quantitative research, whether you're going to collect data through primary sources, secondary sources, whether you'll go to parents, students, teachers, or would you look at past data and collect data from the Department of Further Education website, other schools in that area, go to the Manchester City Council and ask them for certain data if it can be shared. Then that is what you define here. And then the sources from which you'll get the information, which are going to be sacrosanct sources, which are going to be providing you data which is factual, accurate. So you might go to research school's website and look at the Department of Further Education or government website, and that would give you the sources of information for previous year's results of GCSEs. And then what is the conclusion that you want to draw? That is what you need to highlight in 1 or 2 points here, and that would help you address, the first task, which is produce a plan which talks about, for research. This is the area of research. This is how I'll go about producing the plan, and that is the template that you're going to look at as far as accomplishing this task is concerned. Is that okay, Amir?
Yes, sir.
Any questions here? Any questions?
Sir, this research topic will be the part of my assignment.
Yes, this will be a part of your assignment. So some part of it would be related to the task 4, which is given in the assignment brief, which I'll show you just before we end the session. So some part of it would be covered in the assignment, yes. So when you draw it up here, that will become a part of your assignment.
Okay.
Okay. The second assessment criteria talks about, now the main part is the research template or the proposal that you put together. You've done 50% of the job because you've defined pretty much everything in it. We are not going to carry out the research because this is one task in the whole unit, or one learning outcome in the entire unit. But what we're going to be looking at doing is looking at areas of how we carry out research and where we use technology in carrying out that research as a teacher or as an instructor. Now, once you've done the research proposal and using the research template, the other assessment criteria has become quite easy to understand because there are bits and pieces of information that will come out from what you've mentioned, and that will be slightly detailed to cover the other assessment criteria. Now, the 4.2 assessment criteria talks about carry out researches using different sources. So one of the things that we discussed in the template was it basically has what is called sources of information. And that sources of information is basically the sources that you're going to use to collect data. For example, sticking to the example I've given, that how has the school's GCSE result paired with other schools in the area or in the city of Manchester. So you're going to be looking at credible sources or websites from which you're going to collect this data. So you're going to go across maybe to the Ofcall website, the QA code might not be applicable for schools. So here it will be ISI, Independent Schools Inspectorate, which would publish some reports. You would probably look at AQA handbook, which is if the school is following Pearson or is the school following AQA board, you'd probably look at some of the reports that they publish. You look at schools, policies and guidelines. You'd also be looking at maybe sector skill council reports, which sometimes are published to show trends in education. You might look at white papers, published reports, and also check, other schools or competition websites where they publish the GCSE results. So this is basically a list of sources that you're going to mention, which are going to help you gather information about anything related to GCSE physics, the results, the teaching methodology, the curriculum followed, the guidelines which are given by the awarding body and things like that. Is that okay? So this is how you identify the list of sources which are related to your research area, and that is how you mention the sources from which you're going to be getting accurate, factual, and relevant information related to your research area. Is that okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now the next assessment criteria is, it says draft a piece of research using appropriate referencing techniques. Now here is where obviously in the UK education system, there are 2 or 3 different referencing techniques that we use. But what you're going to be looking at is, it is asking you to finalize the report or the mini research proposal that you're going to write, but you're going to write it using appropriate referencing techniques. So here, what you're going to do is basically look at using what is called Harvard referencing technique or Harvard referencing method to write the report. Okay. So in our case, in our context of OTHM and the qualification that you're studying, we follow Harvard referencing, which is also called the author date style referencing method. So you write the name of the author, the date, and then that style of referencing is basically called the Harvard referencing style. So you would be looking at compiling data. The data that you collect will come from different sources, which could be websites, journals, published reports, primary data, which is coming from, speaking to candidates like parents, teachers, and, say, for example, students. But when you collect that data and you reference it in your report, you're going to use Harvard style referencing. Is that okay?
Yes, sir.
Now, when you look at your research, we also need to look at publishing a timeline. Timeline is basically some sort of a timeline that you put in place to understand that if I'm going to carry out this research, it is not an endless exercise, because research requires time, effort, and money and resources. So when you look at time, cost, and quality triangle, every research needs to have a finite time and finite resources, and it needs to be completed in a particular cost which has been allocated. Now, if you were being asked by a head teacher to carry out this research, she would or he would not expect that you write a report which will take 6 months, because you're going to do other parts of your job as well. So here the idea is to primarily look at also defining a timeline, which is done normally through a Gantt chart, to say that this is what I will do primarily in order to start my research, and from when I start to when I finish, and what are the activities that I'm going to be doing in the research. So you start with the approval of proposal from your head teacher. You might say, okay, I might do this in week 1, week 2, because the proposal might be amended, changed. There will be suggestions given by other stakeholders. Then you get to start to gather information in week 3 and 4. Then you do existing collection of information using what is available in the market. Then you define how you're going to tally and collect data for your research, whether it's going to be, you define it in the methodology, whether you're going to do qualitative research, quantitative research, what methods of data collection you're going to use, whether it's going to be, speaking to the candidates, focus group interviews, things like that. And then at some stage, you go into the field to do some data collection, either through desk-based or primary. You analyze the data. And once you analyze the data, what you start to do is put together conclusions, and then you present the findings of your report. So this is normally done by depicting a timeline, and this timeline can be done using depicting it through what is called a Gantt chart. Is that okay? So give
Yes, sir.
1 second. Now, the next assessment criteria talks about finalizing the research using your existing draft. So normally when a research report is written, it is written in this context or in this particular format. So normally there are 5 chapters to the research report. They are generally chapters like this, which is talking about introduction, which includes things like rationale, aims, objective, the background of your study, and why you're going to do this research. Then you look at reviewing of the existing literature by looking at reports, published data, which is available. You define methodology. You look at collecting data, findings, and obviously present those findings. And finally, towards the end, you draw a conclusion and you make recommendations of what could be the areas of future areas of research, depending on what you have collected, what you have managed to do, if there were any constraints that you faced, if there were any ethical considerations that have to be taken into account, which restricted the way that how you could do your research. That would be something that you would need to look at, following when you are looking at writing the report. And that is what is to be done in the assessment criteria 4.4. So essentially what we have covered is, in the research proposal, and what you have written in the outline of that research proposal, which I showed you as a template, needs to be elaborated in these many words to be able to write a final report, because we're not the report has to be appropriate for the appropriate level. We are not writing a report which is going to be a PhD thesis or a master's dissertation. You're writing a report which is related to a context of learning outcome 4. So here the word limits are going to be rationalized, but generally when you do write a research report, it normally varies between 3,500 to 4,500 words. And this could be a research proposal, which then can be used to detail it out further into a detailed report at some stage. But here the idea is to try and understand how do you finalize and put out the findings of your research. And that is what you need to understand in this assessment criteria. So there are normally these findings are put out in a format which normally consists of 5 or 6 chapters. And these chapters are introduction, literature review, research methodology, data collection, findings, and then presentation of these findings, and then finally conclusion and recommendation. Is that okay?
Yes, sir. But sir,
Go on.
I have already seen the data. There are 2 assignments. First assignment contains 4,000 words. Similarly, second assignment also contains 4,000 words. So this one is the third one. So what is the time frame of this assignment? How much time to complete the third one, and also
You'll be looking
first
at you'll be looking at about 2 weeks to be able to complete that assignment. So I will share some details with you after the session in terms of how to go about writing the assignment and how to go about, completing this particular unit. We'll come to that in a second, but we'll look at just completing the assessment criteria for now. Is that okay?
Okay, sir.
The next assessment criteria, the only 2 left. One is one of the most important things in research is that when you do look at research that we carry out, always there are findings. You always relate it to what were the best areas or best practices that you followed, and you also reflect on the, in a way, look at how did you go and undertake that particular research activity or that research project. So in such cases, what we need to do is do a bit of reflection or look at reviewing how the research was carried out and what were the best parts of it, what were the not so best parts of it, and things like that. So here the assessment criteria talks about reflecting on own academic progress in relation to development of those, of your academic skills. Now, sometimes when we do look at taking up areas of research and when we go about researching, what tends to happen is that we might not have the knowledge or skills to be able to carry out all the activities involved in research. So in such cases, a review is undertaken, and that review that we generally undertake is done in the form of some sort of a format or a table, which allows you to understand the activities that you carried out and clinically see whether these activities were carried out in a fashion or a manner which were appropriate for the research project or the activity. and did they aid in helping you to complete that particular activity? So here, what I would essentially do is do what is called a personal development plan, or a PDP, which is reviewing my own area of research, that whether do I have research skills, am I able to, obviously carry out the research activities independently, whether I'm able to gather data independently, those kind of things is what you would look at in reviewing your research progress that you've made as far as this is concerned. So when we do the reflection, in particular, when we talk about, reflection in terms of any activity that you do, and if I look at the process of reflection, generally the process of reflection tends to be wherein you try and gain insight into a professional practice, and then you analytically think about what are the areas which were done correctly or done in a way which was righteous, and what are the areas in which there were gaps, or what are the areas that I could not cover effectively. And those are the learnings that you take forward for the purposes of future development. And that is what we are going to look at in terms of reflection, when we do look at reflection from a point of view of seeing whether I've developed enough research skills, whether I have areas in which I need further development to be able to carry out research. And those are the bits that you're going to mention in this particular table. So this is a table that I've created as a bit of a template. And the idea here is to reflect on your own research skills, not to look at reflection in general about you or your personality, but here the idea is to look at reflection of your own research area or research skills in this particular area. So if I was somebody who was being given a task to research, whether will I be comfortable in carrying out that activity? Do I have the skills? What skills I do not have, and what are the areas that I need to develop on? Those are the bits that you're going to mention, 2-3 points here, which will reflect on your own academic progress vis-a-vis carrying out the research project. Is that okay?
Okay.
So sometimes as a teacher or sometimes as a student, when we look at areas of personal development for students, is that they are not able to academically write. So write academically, which means that you're writing in third person language and you're referencing the material, you're essentially building arguments. That would be an area of development, because students, say, for example, or children, when they come to foundation diploma or after completing their A levels, they go to sixth form. What they're essentially looking at is developing skills wherein their skills of assessments would mean that they have to write assignments. And at some stages, they need to learn how to write academically. So how to reference, using Harvard referencing. You might be looking at interviewing skills. If you are looking at dealing with primary data, you might say interviewing skills and what skills you need to have to be able to interview participants so that you're able to get the meaningful data which is required for your research. So that bit, areas that you think are going to need development from an academic point of view for research specifically, is what you need to put together in this template. And that would show a reflection on how you've carried out the project, how you've carried out the research activity, and what are the areas that you've identified which I need to develop further. So if I'm given an opportunity in the future to carry out research, then these are the areas that I need to improve on to be able to carry out that activity more effectively. Is that okay?
Okay.
Now, the last assessment criteria talks about, developing an action plan to further improve. Now, this is an add-on or a lead-on from an assessment criteria 4.5, wherein first we need to identify what my areas of development are. And here, the areas of development have to be listed down as activities that I will carry out, which will allow me to improve those gap areas. So, for example, one of the areas that I reviewed on was, say, today's date, which is 4th of September. And one of the areas was that interviewing skills, is an area that I need to make progress on. So interviewing skills in order to collect primary data from participants. Now, who are the participants? So you could have participants which could be, say, A children, if you're talking about school, B, parents, 3, head teacher or various stakeholders. So I would say teachers, and here I would say management. Now, because I teach, I know how to gather data from children, and obviously to a certain extent, you might want to learn certain skills in terms of how the questions need to be redressed for parents, because one, it is an area which is sensitive. If they are not happy with the GCSE physics grade which their child has got, then in order for you to probe into that area, you might need to ask questions or create questions in a way which are going to be not pressing for information, but at the same time be having a tone which is more polite, and that would allow you to get meaningful information from them. When you talk and take that same data in forms of questions from teachers, you might need certain different techniques, because you want to be able to extract out information about the student, whether the student was an average student, maybe a student, how the student was actually faring in terms of their cash report, which is knowledge, attitude, skills, and habits. And those are the bits that you might need to look at fishing out. And that requires you to prepare your questionnaires in a way which requires at some stage then asking these questions to the concerned participants. And that would need you to do further preparation. So here I might, say join a session on interviewing participants workshop. So what I would do is, if I think I'm not able to, interview participants, I might look at a training session on how do you interview participants, and that is a workshop that I would attend. An actual date of attending that workshop, you might attend that workshop. It might not be happening, say, 15th of September. And once you've attended the workshop, you feel more confident because you've learned about the different forms of interviewing techniques, like asking open-ended questions, closed questions, asking questions which could start discussion and gets the participant talking to you, icebreaker questions that you need to ask. And that is what you would learn in your workshop on interviewing skills, and that would allow you to collect data from participants in a more effective and more, let's say, productive manner. And that would be showing an action plan that you're putting in place to develop. And when would you say you would have achieved this? After once you get this training done and you get another opportunity to speak to them, you would say, okay, I would go about now testing what I've learned, and I would be looking at achieving this particular skill by 30th of November. Now, that is where an action plan for further improvement would consist of. You list down a couple of activities here, and those activities, what are the actions that you're going to take? Trainings, or maybe join a session, do shadowing with another teacher or colleague in the school, go back to your head teacher and ask for some help in terms of how you would collect this data. Different kind of activities you could mention here. And once those activities are completed, you put that into practice and see how you have then been able to achieve that particular skill, and that would complete the action plan for further development. Is that okay?
Yes, sir. But here you mentioned the topic here.
Are interviewing skills. I think this topic is not related to curriculum or syllabus.
Not related to
Yeah,
this is to give you
yeah,
an understanding of the assessment criteria. Now, this is also
yes.
a template which is available, and that template can be used to contextualize, and you might want to look at some ideas of how you would put this together when it comes to relating it to the learning outcome and technology in education. Now, in order to put this into context, what I've done is, when I look at this particular task in particular and the learning outcome, which is talking about the use of technology in general, what I've done as of now is to create a bit of a sampler to say that this is an outline of how I would carry out research related to education, my area of work, and in particular, using technology. So this sample is what is also I'm going to make available, which talks about how do I address the research project, and the assessment criteria is 4.1 to 4.6. related to learning outcome. This is task 3 in your assignment. So here, what I've done is I've compiled everything that we've discussed today in a format, because when you do the assignment, the assignment is not based on carrying out a research. The assignment is based on technology in education. So it'll have learning outcome 1, 2, and 3. But task 3 of the assignment brief specifically focuses on how would you go about addressing and creating a research project. So this is an example that I've said that in my research project, I plan to outline a structure of, a report, which could be curriculum planning that I do for teaching and delivering level 2 functional skills in English. And I've designed my research proposal and plan. I put a few questions in place that I'll be addressing in research. And these questions, which are 4 questions that I'm looking at addressing, I've put together as research questions. How would I do this research? Secondary research, which is desk-based research. And what are the sources from which I'm collecting the information? I put NCFE specification documents for functional skills and the curriculum resources which are available. My literature review would come across from how the English curriculums on ESOL and other, boards have been developed, specifically Cambridge ESOL and looking at AQA. And then what I would do at some stages in terms of carrying out this research, I'm going to create a draft scheme of work and lesson plan, which will be meeting the NCFE specification for me to be able to teach this course in the school. I will develop an appropriate assessment strategy and some assessments, which when the students go through this particular course, at the end of it, I will test the knowledge, and that will be done through a test or a synoptic test, which will be carried out, which the learners would sit. I would insert a timeline for carrying out this research, and then some bits of detailing that I've done in terms of how would I review the existing literature or curriculum or facts which are available about this qualification in the market, and then put down the sources from which I'm actually going to collect this data, and then describe the methodology. And that would become a template that I would actually use for carrying out my task in assignment, which is task 3. Does that answer your question, which you had asked earlier to me?
Sir, which question?
You had asked that how would I go about doing the assignment, because the assignment has 3 tasks in the assignment brief for this particular qualification. So if you see, this is the assignment brief, and in the assignment brief, we've covered the 4 learning outcomes. But when you go into the detailing of what tasks have to be done, task 1 consists of reviewing the evaluation of technology, which assesses this assessment criteria. Task 2 looks about these assessment criteria, and task 3 is actually a task related to research project. So here it asks you to do these particular bits, which are the assessment criteria, and this is where you would need to pick up something from your area of interest. Like I've shown you an example of the NCFE level 2 functional skills, wherein I'm doing a curriculum planning to update the curriculum and how the delivery is done within the school, considering the changes which have been introduced last year. And that would help me address this particular task, which is research project. Is that okay?
Yes,
So
sir.
this sample also I will make available. And the background to this is that last year, there were changes introduced in the functional skills qualification by Ofqual. And what I was given as a task by my course leader or by the head teacher was to look at revising our curriculum by researching into what changes have been introduced and how this curriculum would change and how would it affect our delivery in the school. So what I did was I basically decided to do my research on producing this revised curriculum by carrying out these assessment criteria, which are listed in the unit and the learning outcome that we have covered today, which is learning outcome 4. So this is a draft outline that you would need to produce for your task 3 in the assignment. Is that okay?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So, so it means that there are 3 tasks, and 2 tasks contains 1500 words, and one task contains 1000 words. Total 4000 words.
That is correct. Yes. So what you have to do is our research project that we have to do, we have to essentially not do a detailed project. We have to do a proposal which has these broad outlines of addressing the assessment criteria. And this proposal has to be produced in about 1500 words, which will become a part of your assignment.
Yes, sir.
You understood it well. So if I just show you the assignment brief again, what you mentioned is absolutely correct. So if you see, the first task is 1500 words, which is a report. The second task that you've asked is a guidance document, which is about 1000 words. And the research project, which is essentially a proposal that we are going to, a project which is going to have an outline as a proposal, is going to cover some of these assessment criteria, and that is going to be about 1500 words. Is that
So
okay?
total for 4000 word. And sir, what's the deadline of this?
This will be about 2 weeks from today.
Yes, sir. I'm doing work on first assignment, and I have written just 1000 words for task one. Yet.
That's absolutely great. You can take more time to do the assignment. There is no, the reason I give you 2 weeks is primarily to ensure that while you're fresh with the information that we have covered in the unit, you're able to complete the work so that you don't need to revisit any of
Yes,
this.
sir.
And that is why the 2 weeks. But sometimes, obviously we're busy with work and other activities as well. If it takes a couple more days, but as long as you get the assignment right and you are happy with the output, you are able to submit
Yes,
after
sir.
2 weeks as well. That is not a problem.
Yes, sir. Inshallah, I will complete 4000 words before 10th of September, inshallah.
That's great. No worries. And what I will do is the copy of the recording, today's presentation, which is slightly updated from what is available, previously, I'm going to put along with all the templates that I've shown, if they are of use and help that you want to use for the purposes of task 3 of the assignment. So these templates will also be available. 4.6, they're labeled as 4.5, and then the research proposal part of it, which is going to be research proposal template 4.1. Okay.
Okay,
And
sir.
then we'll be looking at sending you a schedule for the next unit, which will essentially be looking at a different unit that we're going to be starting, and that will be taught by one of my other colleagues.
Okay, sir.
Okay. And if you have any questions that you think of, or if you need any further details, then my suggestion would be to send us an email, on LearnerWork. And that email, I would be able to send across maybe attachments or any details that you ask for promptly on that particular, query.
Okay, sir.
Okay, that's great. Any other questions apart from what we've discussed today that you have?
No, sir. When I get all the data, then I will ask some question about that.
That's perfectly okay. No worries. So you enjoy the rest of your day, and I will see you hopefully in the next few.
Ramon,
Yes, Saya. Yes.
sorry, because I just let you finish everything and then ask you some question. Because I just submit all the templates and I want to know, have you received them or not? If not, I can resend it to you.
No, I've received your templates which were sent yesterday. So thank you for doing that. I will have a look at them today. The reason I wanted you to join this session as well today was to share these templates with you. And I think there would be some bits of additional template for this unit that you will also have to read. So what I will do is I will make available the copy of this recording. All these templates will be up on the Moodle just after this session.
Yeah.
And what I will also do is share that sample as well, which I've shown for the task 3 that I've created. And that is something that you can look at contextualizing and maybe, using at your end. And that is something that you can also submit, which will hopefully complete pretty much everything, at your end for certification.
Yeah. Okay.
Is that okay?
Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Saya. Thanks for joining. Thanks, Amir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Take care,
Okay.
and bye for now.
Bye.
So just to, share with you